Welcome to Forum 360. I am Mark Welfley, and thank you for joining us today for our Global Outlook with a Local View. Every morning, Ohio's 110,000 plus teachers in 600 plus school districts wake up with the mission to inspire their students to grow, learn, and achieve. Despite their tireless efforts, more than half of Ohio students, from elementary through high school, across the subjects of math, science, reading, and writing, do not test as proficient. Ohio students are comparable with students across the United States. COVID and numerous other factors have made educating our students an uphill battle. Today, we will discuss the academic state of the Ohio student and the teaching challenges educators face with Dr. Judith March and Dr. Karen Peters. Former teachers and administrators themselves, Dr. March and Dr. Peters are co-founders of EdFocus Initiative, a consulting firm that has worked with 57 Ohio school districts and over 10,000 teachers, impacting over 160,000 students over the past 20 years. Their singular focus is to provide schools and educators with customized, site-based services to help increase student achievement. Welcome, Dr. March. Dr. Peters.
Thank you.
So let's just start with where you came from and how you got to found EdFocus.
Okay, I'm Karen Peters, and I started my career as a middle school math and science teacher, and from there I became an elementary principal, and then a curriculum director and a curriculum coordinator. When I was a principal, everybody said to me, you need to meet Judy March and you two should work together. And I think they thought we'd kill each other and they'd be rid of both of us. But we did become business partners, and we've worked together for a lot of years. We both worked at the Educational Service Center, and then we went on a grant from the Cleveland Foundation to work in Cleveland School District. And we've worked there pretty much Cleveland and all across the country for the last 20-some years. And we've had great results in all the places we've been, and we're just blessed with the teachers. And we've hired many of our teachers to be our consultants. So that's my background.
Yeah, great.
And I was an English teacher 100 years ago, and I became an assistant principal and then worked in the central office, and I joined Karen at Kent State when we had a chance to work on this grant. And my whole passion has been what do teachers do that impacts how students learn? And we started with that many years ago, and we've gotten into the standards and other things ever since.
So you bring up standards. The core kind of concept or buzzword when it comes to student and achievement and scores is standards. Like what are standards? And how did they, give me a little background of how they came to be standards.
Well, standards are, for us here in Ohio, we have a set of state standards that represent the skills and concepts that students need to master to move on to the next grade level and be successful. And they build on each year, going consecutively. And if things get skipped or jumped, then those kids have a hole in the learning. And so they're very important because they build the roadway that we will take to get kids to where they need to be in their thinking.
And they're not just splinter skills, they're in-depth concepts about the standards, about the content. And so they all involve kids constructing meaning for themselves, yes, not just memorizing things. They have to construct meaning and then be able to apply that somewhere else.
I think that's the biggest thing with the standards is it shows us as educators the level of thinking that we need to get our kids to be able to do. Not just memorizing facts or memorizing a word list, but being able to think.
So when someone comes to you and say, why should we care about standards? My child can do X, Y, and Z, and that's good enough to function successfully in the world. Why should we care?
Well, here in America and here in Ohio, just good enough has never really been our our mantra. We all want our children to do as well as they can. And what's a little scary about the test results being so low here in Ohio and the rest of the country, the fact that 2/3 of our kids aren't proficient, let's say, on these tests, but that other places in the world, they are proficient. That's the scary part. We don't want our kids, the kids in America or the kids in Ohio, to constantly be second string, constantly be third string behind everyone else. We want our kids to be able to compete at the highest levels just like everyone else. So we think it's really important for them to demonstrate higher levels of thinking and content mastery.
So student achievement through these tests is largely measured in the subjects of math, science, and reading. Why not music? Why not something else? Why are those three the core topics that students need to master?
Well, there are standards in all of those areas, in music and the other areas as well. And interestingly enough, since you say music, I'll just use that as an example. Some of the math concepts lap right over into that. And so we're able to build a cross-curriculum instead of doing isolation. And I think that is one big piece. Wouldn't you say, Judy?
Yes.
And I think it's the level of thinking that we're asking kids to do, not just memorize and stay in this one little box, but be able to merge across content areas and look analytically at things.
Think of education as a fence row, not a bunch of fence posts or a bunch of silos. And so if the things are connected, physical education with art, with music, with math, with social studies, it's a more holistic way to look at things. And sometimes those other subjects are the very subjects that can help open the door to the academic subjects. So they're all important.
Just 2 weeks ago, we just did a professional development at a school, and one of the biggest participants was the physical education teacher. And he had, because we were focused on math problem solving, and he asked all kinds of great questions about how he could incorporate the math into his subject. I mean, he was just a breath of fresh air. He was great.
And in the language arts session, we used a picture of the Rockettes, and he was explaining to all the other teachers about how the Rockettes achieved the leg kick with physics and with movement. And it was interesting. I hadn't thought of it that way, and he was able to explain that to others.
You hear periodically, and probably rightly, that certain students don't test well, but they have the aptitude or the achievement level, but they're just not good test takers, whether it's they're more visual people, or they don't do well under time. So how do you account, or how does the state system account for students that kind of fit in that category?
Well, actually, what should happen, and we probably don't see enough of this, and we've seen really good teachers do this, is how we know this. The students don't get a chance to look at their test results themselves and see where they were strong and weak. They don't do an error analysis kind of thing of their own performance, and so they don't get a chance to see what mistakes they made and why. And so when you don't do that, it's really hard to do any better the next time. You just continue to make the same error. And so one of the things that, if we do test analysis, if teachers do test analysis and students participate in that, they can see the errors that they made, and teachers can see the errors. And if it's everybody in the class versus 2 kids, that kind of thing, are there errors that the more proficient kids make and errors that the less proficient kids make? All that analysis would really help, so that when we get the test scores back, we can do something about them, not just see the same thing over and over again every year.
One of the things that you can do through the State Department is you can download the released items from the state test every year. And so we do that, and they're coded to standards. And then when we're working with teachers on the standards, we'll say, this is how it's asked on the state test. And sometimes when they look at the way the questions are asked, because they don't see the test, when they look at how the questions are asked, they're like, whoa, I know exactly why my kids didn't get that. And so the questions on the test are not about just memorized skills, but they force kids to think. And they have to read the questions and be able to know what it's asking.
For example, a test might ask an item, or the standard might say, to analyze the impact of something on something, like a cell part on something that happens with digestion. Well, sometimes we forget that's the level of difficulty, and so maybe our test item is just name cell parts. Well, the kids are really good at naming cell parts, but they had no idea how to explain an impact. And so to dig deeper, the test items should really reflect how the standards are written, and so if we can get teachers to mimic those kinds of test items, then the kids will be better able to show what they know.
Are there alternative tests other than, say, the MAP test that students can take who may not fit into the traditional kind of MAP style of time?
There are a ton of tests out there available.
So those are applied or given when maybe there's a bright student but this doesn't test well?
Yes.
And after it's discovered through the analysis that you mentioned, that they can be kind of retested in a different way.
Well, and another thing too, when you look at how your kids score on the state test, for example, and you see that your best scoring kids, your high achievers, miss the same questions as the low achieving kids, okay, that's got to be something that's, I'm not hooking into something that's in the standard and is reflected on the test.
As a teacher.
Yeah, and so then I start to unpack that and I look at how is that looked at on the test. And like, for example, I'll just read you this quick sample question. Nicole and Kim go apple picking. Kim picks N apples. Nicole picks 8 fewer apples than Kim. Create an expression to represent the number of apples that Nicole picks. And see, if we don't set up problems like that, we're just going to say, Nicole picks 8 fewer apples than Kim, N is boom, and we give them all the information, and all they're doing is just tagging a few things together. But here they actually have to read that and figure it out. And the state test really forces them to prove that they know the concepts.
Interesting. If you're just joining us, thank you for listening and for viewing. My name is Mark Welfley, and this is Forum 360. And I'm joined today by Dr. Judith March and Dr. Karen Peters, who are here. They are consultants with EdFocus Initiative. And EdFocus is a consulting firm that works with school districts, educators, teachers, administrators around Ohio and really beyond to help teachers understand how to help students improve their scores. So, continuing on, let's tackle the question I'm sure you're waiting for, which is COVID, and how COVID has affected student scores and achievement.
Well, no one really knew exactly what to do when it hit. Everybody was confused and a lot of trial and error. Most of the schools wound up with an online learning or a kind of a distance model that they used, and they did their very best and they tried their hardest. But what we're discovering now is that kids fell way behind. And I think the problem with that is there wasn't enough teacher-student feedback where teachers could actually hear a student's response and respond to that student, or student-to-student feedback where folks could exchange information, and it was really difficult to see what students were and weren't learning. It was kind of a guessing system, and what they were able to type in online may or may not have been truly reflective of what they knew. And especially if it wasn't quite right, then without some sort of analysis between the two of them with live bodies and live conversation, it's really hard to find out what that was. So it was imprecise. In most districts found it frustrating, and try hard as they did, there were so many kids who now teachers are discovering, are way behind, as much as a half year to 2/3 of a year behind, or missing skills that they should have had.
And so many times, our teachers will say to us when we're working with them, I'll just say, you and Mark and Judy will say, wow, when Mark said that thing in class, that made it for me, I got it. All the stuff I was saying as the teacher didn't make it. What you said as another student helped her understand. And so that student-to-student interaction was also totally missing. But in many cases, they didn't even bother tuning into the instruction. And so talk about a gap. I mean, they totally missed out.
Can you comment on like what teachers or what administrators and school districts are doing now to try to catch up in, you know?
We're working with a group this year in math, and the one 6th grade teacher that we were working with this year, she said, I was teaching 4th grade during the COVID, and now she's the 6th grade teacher, so she has those kids that she had in 4th grade. And she said, I couldn't get to all this stuff, and she said now the 5th grade teacher tried to fill in some of the 4th grade stuff, and now she's trying to fill in some of the still 4th and more 5th, and still get through her 6th grade stuff. And so that's just made life so difficult for all of the teachers, but they're all in the same boat. I mean, it's like, it's not that anybody intentionally left something out, it just wasn't the opportunity to do it.
And there just isn't physically time in a 9-month school year to
do
reteach
3 grade levels.
two grade levels at a time, and if you spend all your time reteaching the grade level before, you're not going to get time to teach your own grade level.
Right.
But knowing the standards better, having a working knowledge of the standards and have an intimate acquaintance with how they function, you'll realize they aren't quite as separate as they might appear. They can be folded together. And so some of the things I don't know from 3rd grade can be folded into what I'm learning in 4th. And I know that might sound complicated, but if folks can take the time, if they're given the time, if teachers are given the professional development time and they're given some assistance, this is really doable. It's just, I think we just rushed right back to school because we wanted them all back in school, and that's okay. That was a good thing. We certainly didn't want to continue what wasn't working, but we've got to do some remedial work to make the best use of the time we now have. And putting 2 years in 1 year isn't working. And extending the school year and extending the school day, that's not realistic. We've got to figure out ways of folding latent skills or missing skills into the current content. And we can do it. It can be done. Teachers can do it. They just need the time and they need the assistance to do it.
So this next question is more about a success story kind of wrap.
Oh, can I just jump in there for a minute? When you get the kids at the beginning of the year, if you do some kind of an assessment and you look back on your assessment, the questions that dealt with concepts that came the year or 2 years before, that tells you where the holes are and how you need to go back and intervene. So the pre-testing, don't you think, Judy, is absolutely key here to know where the gaps are.
At the beginning of the year.
At the beginning of every unit.
Oh, unit.
Of every unit.
Okay.
Because like in math, I'm not just teaching. I don't want to do at the beginning of the year when I'm not teaching something until later in the year. I want to do it the closer I get, because they might reinforce or refresh some of those things as I'm going throughout the year. So it would look very different if I did it all at the very beginning of the year. I do it as I'm getting ready to chunk out each unit.
A comparable language arts example might be grammar or parts of speech, and they missed, let's say, the adjective, or they missed prepositions, or they missed pronouns. And so teachers are wringing their hands about it. They're going to have to go back and do all those pronoun drills and all those adjective drills and all those preposition drills or complete incomplete sentences or whatever it is. But when you ask them, so can kids use pronouns when they speak? Oh, yeah. Well, how about adjectives? Oh, sure. They don't always spell them right when they write them, but they know how to use adjectives. Oh, perfect. Okay, what's that tell you? Oh. And they suddenly realize the kids may know more about adjectives and pronouns and whatever it was, complete sentences, than was thought before. And so we might not have to go back and reteach all that if we fold that into what we're doing. And so a lot of things we discover were unnecessary, perhaps, when we taught them in the first place, and made necessary now because we have to. And so that helps us get rid of some things that maybe weren't as successful in the first place.
Off the air, we were talking about how it takes, I think you mentioned about a year, if the district and all the players and stakeholders are invested in the change. It takes about a year to see some change in student scores. Want to both of you maybe comment on maybe a success story or why that takes a year?
Well,
give some
if you want to lose weight and you buy new gym togs and new sneakers and a new scale, but you don't change how you live your life or what you do, you're going to still probably weigh the same. So if you spend some money and you take time to invest in a new program or some training, or maybe looking at the standards a new way, but you don't maintain that, you don't do that program with fidelity, you're not going to get the results. Plus, we think if the principal isn't continually encouraging you, continually making it possible for you to implement that program, it's not likely to work.
And I would say, too, that the focus of the standards is building conceptual understanding. And if you have, and that goes right along with what Judy just said, it's not about drill and kill, it's conceptual understanding. And for example, in math, I know I've worked with a lot of people who want to do the drill fact the multiplication factorials every week or every 2 to 3 days. And they time that, but their kids can't do any problem solving that involves multiplication, because when they read the problem, they have no idea what the problem is asking. And it's really reading and understanding what's there and then knowing what to do. You can give them charts to do with their math facts, but it's understanding what the question is asking and being able to think mathematically that's the key. I don't know if you want to change anything with that for language arts, but that to me, Mark, is probably one of the biggest things, is get away from the drill and kill and focus more on thinking.
Let's go to the other big concept that influences student scores and students' life and perhaps all of our lives, and that's social media. To the extent that you can, how has social media influenced student scores? Is it a straight line? Is it a dotted line? Is there no line? How do they relate?
This is your question, but I'll start. I think that the kids like doing social media and they want school to be that same way. But it's not about entertainment. It's about learning. And it just, they want everything to be fun and a game. And sometimes it's learning how to think. And so to me, that's the biggest thing about the social media. They're looking for something fun and cute and entertaining. And sometimes you have to really stop and focus and think and concentrate on what you're doing and be able to look at how things relate to each other, I think is a really key piece. I don't know.
We got a chance to observe some classrooms in an urban district. And one of the things we noticed, this was before they required the cell phones to be checked at the door. They tried to work cell phones into the instruction, which I can understand. I can see that they thought that was a good way for kids to look things up and respond. But what we noticed was the kids were constantly distracted by that, constantly distracted. Had to have it in their hands, had to be fiddling with it even when, and the teachers would have to say, put it down now, we're not doing that. They couldn't. They could not keep their hands, they just constantly had to be looking or tapping or poking. And the other thing was they were, it's hard to explain this, but they didn't look at books. And they spent very little time in books or very little time on a printed word. And so all they could see was that tiny screen at one time. And so when we went to the next page or the third page or the 10th page, there was no context to back up. And so we were able to get teachers to use wall charts. For example, in mathematics, you've got 5 problems you want solved, so you give each problem to a team. And so instead of doing it on the machine, they have to put it on a chart pad. Well, that was a shock in the first place. How to use a marker, how to use a chart pad. But they did. And so once they put it up there, we noticed they didn't use the phone as much. They looked up there. What do you think would be the impact of that?
Well, I thought they'd be able to concentrate more.
Exactly, and they focused up there, and then they could see every day, they could keep seeing the same thing they did the day before. And
because you left them up.
And when she added to it, or if they added something to it, let's say they said, well, supposing the egg carton had twice as many eggs, or supposing the box was half the size, or supposing something was twice as many, then they could quickly change that. And so it stayed up there with the original problem.
And same thing in language arts with vocabulary.
Same thing.
If you put those up on charts and that kind of thing, and where they've written sentences with the words, it's amazing. The kids will look up there even after you take them down, because they remember where it was and how it looked.
But on those little screens, that's all they looked at. And they could not, and this was in every class. I'm not, and you know, my grandchildren use the computer all the time. I'm not, I know they're here to stay, and I think they're wonderful. But I think in the classroom, they became a little bit of a liability. And I think it's different now when teachers have mixed it in with, you know, traditional learning and books and things like that. I think it's been better. That's just our opinion. I'm sure there are younger teachers, younger consultants who would disagree with that. But just this is what we've noticed in 50 years of looking at this.
Yeah.
In 15 seconds each, in the last minute we have or so, share with me your greatest worry from the way you see things about education.
I worry that people are going to jump to a visceral reaction about closing the Department of Ed and suddenly thinking the sky is falling and the world is coming to an end. I think the states are perfectly capable of handling education. I think it's going to be fine, and I think they shouldn't have this big concern that everything's going to fall apart. But I also think that ed choice and vouchers can be a good thing. I think it needs to be an opportunity for every school to say, you know what, we're going to get so good that people will choose us. We're going to be so good, we won't have to worry about people leaving to go to other schools. And that's what I hope everybody will do, is be so good that people will choose them for the particular things that they offer. Fear I have is that we'll let politics ruin that opportunity.
Yeah, okay, go
Can I
ahead.
share?
Yeah.
Okay. When I read and was thinking about this, I'm thinking, but my biggest concern is the teaching of elementary math and teaching concepts rather than just facts, and teaching kids to think. I think that students need to learn to think mathematically, not look for trigger words like how many in all, how many are left, because when I'm looking at the high stakes test, they actually use those words to trigger a totally different thought. And so if you've taught me to look at those trigger words and I see that, oh, that means I have to add. And that is not what the question is even asking for. So when we're trying to give kids all these little shortcuts, and sometimes we actually mess them up.
5 years on since the declaration of the COVID pandemic, it is fair to say that the Ohio student is still struggling. It takes a village to raise a child, and most certainly more than a village to educate one. I'd like to thank all of you, teachers, principals, administrators, staff, and those who I'm not mentioning now, and you know who you are, for your commitment to our students. I would also like to thank Dr. March and Dr. Peters today for being here, and encourage each of you to keep your eyes, ears, and mind open. Until next time on Forum 360.
Forum 360 is brought to you by John S. and James L. Knight Foundation, the Akron Community Foundation, Hudson Community Television, the Rubber City Radio Group, Shaw Jewish Community Center of Akron, Blue Green, Electric Impulse Communications, and Forum 360 supporters.